أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وقوله الحق وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل يا عبادي الذين أسرفوا على أنفسهم لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله إن الله يغفر الذنوب جميعا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات على محمد وآل محمد ما صل على السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I would like to congratulate everyone on this very auspicious occasion upon which we are celebrating Wiladat of our Holy Prophet Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. And on this very important occasion, while we're going through a very difficult time throughout this pandemic, and then the recent hatred against or attacks against this noble prophet, under the theme of a glimmer of hope in unprecedented times, inshallah, I will try to limit my discussions to very brief so that we can benefit from the keynote speaker, Sheikh Amir Mukhtar Faizi, after me. But tabarrukan, the ayat that I chose for tonight's talk is from Surah Zumar, Surah number 39, ayat number 53. A very important ayah which talks about the concept of not losing hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. The verse begins by saying, "Say that Allah declares, O my servants who have committed excesses against their own souls, do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Indeed, Allah will forgive all sins. He is all forgiving and all merciful." When we wake up in the morning, at least I do, when we wake up in the morning, there are two notifications that I find on my phone, and it is unfortunate that it is the case. One that informs me of the weather in my local city, and second, that informs me of how many cases of COVID-19 are there, and what is the change and how many more deaths have been accounted for because of this pandemic. It's unfortunate. These are the two first notifications that I get on my phone every morning when I wake up. And just like when we check the temperature and the weather so that, if you have to go outside, you dress accordingly, another information that is being given is that how badly this pandemic has affected and impacted all of us. With all of that, still we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His, all the graciousness that He has favored us with, all of His bounties, that we're still able to breathe, we're still able to thank Him, and we're still able to perform our duties in the way that we would be able to do so. But as you check the news, the next thing that you find is that this noble individual, this prophet, whom more than 1 billion people revere and venerate and respect around the globe, not just Muslims but also non-Muslims, is under attack. And for some reason, freedom of expression becomes the freedom to go ahead and do and say whatever you want to, even if it harms and hurts the individuals on the other side. So for that reason, I chose this ayat from Surah Zumar, ayat number 53. We find that the most hopeful ayat in Quran is considered to be this ayat. With all the 6,000 plus ayat that you have in Quran, the most hopeful ayat is considered to be this very ayat of Surah 39, ayat number 53. Why? Because Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib said so. He said, "Ma fil Qur'an ayatun awsa min ibadi alladhina asrafu. That there's not an ayat in Quran which is more wasi' as far as encompassing, as far as the favors and as far as the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is concerned than this particular ayah. Why? Because Allah starts off with the word ibadi, O my servant, which itself shows the grace and the lutf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala toward his servants. That when someone wants to forgive you, when someone wants to favor you, they speak to you in this very noble way, in this very honorable way. Allah addresses us by saying, Ya ibadi, O my servants. That means Allah considers us to be his ibad. Number two, Allah uses the word israf instead of using the word zulm, gunah, ma'asiyat, or, for example, jinayat, injustice, sin, or crime. He didn't say, oh, those who have done injustice to their souls, oh, those who have committed sins, oh, those who are the criminals. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word israf. Those who have done what? Those who have gone beyond the limit. Israf comes from, extravagance. Those who have done injustice in that sense, that itself shows another lutf and the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah uses the expression ala anfusihim, which shows that all the sins that are due to our own wrongdoings, and it is not the case that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us do any of those wrongdoings. That is another lutf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then lastly, Allah uses the expression la taqnutu, that do not lose hope. The word taqnutu in Arabic, qunut, is used when you are in despair of something which is good, which is positive, which again highlights that if one shouldn't lose hope with the vast mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If our Rabb is Rabbul Alameen, our Prophet is Rahmatun lil Alameen. If Allah is Ar-Rahmanur Rahim, the Prophet is Rahmat for all of the nations. That's why it is called mercy to all of the universe. And this shouldn't be difficult to understand, because the way Allah's kingdom, as He is Rabbul Alameen, to the extent that Allah's kingdom is, which there isn't really any boundaries to it, to that extent goes the mercy of this prophet that is being referred to as Rahmatan lil Alameen. So we recited some of the verses in the beginning. Another verse in Quran, Surah Anbiya 107, which very famously says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that we did not send you but as a mercy to all nations. This verse means that everything Prophet brought, whether it was jihad, whether it was retribution, whether it was laws and the ahkam, which apparently might seem like they are going against us, they're all considered to be part of the mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent through this prophet. This prophet was able to impact the entire human race with his presence. And not only just for the Muslims, but also for non-Muslims. Prophet said, in reference to losing hope, in reference to having despair, in concept of being mayus, the Holy Prophet says, Kun lima la tarju arja minka lima tarju fa inna akhi Musa ibn Imran dahaba liyaqtabis naran fakallamahu rabbahu azza wa jal. Prophet says, be more hopeful about that which you don't expect anything from. Just pay attention to this. He said, be more hopeful about that which you don't expect anything from. As my brother Musa ibn Imran, he went to get some fire and he came back having spoken to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He saw fire, he went to get fire. In return, what happened? He ended up speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he became Kalimullah, and that was the title that was given to him. So we understand there's this concept of having fear and having hope. These are the two driving agents in our lives. These are the two things which shape our personality, which give us a way to go ahead and become a perfect being. These two elements of soul in perfection of insan, it is impossible to reach any sort of reform or any sort of perfection without these two. Without khawf, without fear, insan will feel arrogant and above obedience. So you need to have fear of the Almighty. Without umeed, without raja, without hope, insan won't be able to bring correct reform inside and continue on the path of corruption. So we find that these two things have to be hand in hand. They sort of work like the two pedals that you have in your car. Of course, if you're driving an automatic car, you have the gas and you have the brake, right? One where you accelerate, the other one which you go ahead and stop. You need to have both of them. If only you have one working, then may God be with you. When you're speeding up to the speed limit, at the same time you need this brake to slow down if there's traffic ahead of you. So these two work so that you survive, so that you may live. Otherwise, if you had only one and not the other, then bad things will follow. So if raja or umid or hope takes over, insan won't reach the destination, because having hope without any action is merely considered to be a wish. Without action, if you don't have hope, without action, it is considered to be what? A wish. You're just hoping for something, but you're not doing anything about it. You're just wishing for something. You need to go ahead and work for it. Sinner and oppressor, with all the evilness, insan will believe he is a pious and a clean person who deserves rahmat and the maghfirat of Allah. This person won't try to understand ita'at, nor will this person will try to purify himself. Same way, this khawf and this fear, if that takes over alone, he will feel hopeless and will go into despair. Therefore, there's no inspiration and there's no dalil to correct anything. He will not find anything. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Muttaqeen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam said, Lawla al-amal. And he's speaking about this hope that we have. He says, Lawla al-amal, alim al-insanu hasbi ma huwa fihe, walau alima hasba ma huwa fihe, mata min al-hawli wal-wajal. If there was no hope, imagine living a life hopelessly. If there was no hope, insan would have recognized his rightful state, and thus he would have died out of fear. There's a very insightful story which could give us, those who have, in certain areas of our life might have lost hope sometimes, gives us inspiration to look at. The story of a person who is known as Abu Ja'rana. Now that was not his name. He became father of Ja'rana. Ja'rana is it is a hard-shelled beetle. And this man was sitting in the masjid in Dimashq, Jami Masjid of Dimashq, and he had lost all the hope. He was absolutely hopeless in anything that was happening, as some people might be feeling during this pandemic. With job gone, for example, difficult to make ends meet, and other illnesses that might be affecting family members, may be affected because of this pandemic, and other things that might be affecting you, physically or financially. This person was the same way. He said, I came to the masjid, I was sitting, leaning against this pillar of the mosque, and then I spent the entire night. There was this lantern, or this lamp, which was on top of the pillar. And I saw this little beetle, this Ja'rana, try to climb up this very steep pillar. He said, I just sat there and I counted that scrab, that beetle, that hard-shelled beetle, tried to climb 700 times. He said, I looked at it, I said, look, this little creature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who wants to reach on top where there's a lamp, because that's what it's attracted to. And it's not giving up, and it's persevering in getting to that lamp. While me as an insan, whom Allah has given all the intellect in the world and has given the ability to do whatever it is that I want to, have so easily given up in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He makes this intention. He gets up, he goes and performs 2 rakat salat of shukrana that Allah has taught him a lesson. He said, when I came back, I saw the beetle had made it all the way to the top of the pillar. He said, that is how I learned the example of how to be persevere and not to ever give up. Again, as I mentioned, I'll be very brief in my discussion tonight. Just one last story to end this call, that a glimmer of hope in the time of these unprecedented times that we're going through. Prophet's personality, and inshallah you will hear from our keynote speaker more about it, In fact, during the first 10 days of Muharram al-Haram, we actually did hear a great deal from the Sirat of Rasulullah. Shaheed Mutahari, in his book about Prophet, he mentions this story. He mentions the story which highlights the impact of Rasulullah on mankind. He quotes a story of Avicenna, Abu Ali Sina, along with his student Bahman Yar. And of course, they were very close. And Abu Ali Sina was an extraordinary person with exceptional qualities. One of the exceptional qualities that he had was he was a very intellectual person. We all know that, and we can attest to that. Secondly, he was also very sharp in seeing things. That means he had a very bright and sharp eyesight and vision, both physical and as well as otherwise. And at the same time, he was very sharp in hearing things. That he would hear things from, someone, and he would keep it with him. Or he would be able to hear things from far distance. That's why there were some fictional stories about Abu Ali Sina, about Avicenna, that when a blacksmith strikes on an iron in Kashan or in Isfahan, Abu Ali Sina can hear it from that far distance. Of course, these are all fictional stories, no truth to it. But you have these fictional stories based on some exceptional qualities that a person may possess. So with that, his student Bahman Yar comes to him one day and he says, you should declare nubuwwat, because you are exceptional in all of these areas. And people will believe you. No doubt people will believe you. Of course, Abu Ali Sina, he was enraged. He said, how dare you say such a thing? And that too being my student. He said, no, I'm saying true. I'm saying truth. You're going to go ahead and adopt, you will get a lot of followers. So he wanted to set an example, a practical example so that his student understands. On one of their travels, when they were traveling, of course it was winter time, and they had camped somewhere, and they were all tucked in, and it was, a time when it had snowed also. And when they were all cozy and comfortable, Abu Ali Sina hears the sound of adhan. When he wakes up hearing the sound of adhan from the top of the minara, he calls upon his student Bahman Yar. He says, wake up. Bahman Yar wakes up saying, what is it? He said, go get me a glass of water. Bahman Yar, back in the day, they didn't have any heaters. And to keep yourself warm, he was wearing, he had layers of, comforters upon himself. And there was some fire that was next to him. He said, if I get out now, it'll take me a while before I can get back to being warm again. So he started bringing thousands of excuses. He said, when your stomach is in inflammation, you shouldn't drink any cold water. It's going to cause, it'll have some sort of reaction. Abu Ali Sina said, am I a doctor or are you a doctor? Are people following my decisions in physics, in science, or are they following yours? He said, no, you are the doctor, but I'm worried about your well-being. He said, no. I am your spiritual father, because of course, your teacher is your spiritual father. Go get me a glass of water. Again, Bahman Yar was not in the mood of getting up at that time, so he brought in more excuses. He says that due to the fear of your well-being, which is more important, I can overlook your obedience, which is less important in this case. And then he was bringing more and more excuses. It says when you tell someone who's lazy to do something, they start giving you advices like a father. Fatherly advices come from a lazy person when you tell them to go ahead and do something which they don't want to do. When Abu Ali Sina was completely satisfied that he will not get up and he will not go ahead and get him water, he said to him that I was not thirsty at all anyway. To begin with, I was never thirsty. I was just trying to test you. Remember, you had asked me the other day that I should go ahead and declare nubuwwat and people will believe in me? He said, yes, I remember it vividly. He said, out of all the people who would have believed in me should have been you, because you are my closest student. You have studied under me for so many years. Yet when I asked you to do a simple task, you did not respond to me. In fact, you started giving me hundreds and hundreds of excuses. He said, Prophet Muhammad passed away 400 years ago, in that time of Abu Ali Sina. It's been 1400 years now, but 1,000 years ago. He said Prophet Muhammad passed away 400 years ago, and still this old man gets up every morning in the winter after it has snowed, goes up onto the minar, and he says, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. He said, that's what you call a prophet. That's what you call someone who had come to go ahead and bring people to the level where even after 400 years and even after the centuries will pass by. And that's why you can see today there's not a moment in the world that we live in, at least in our world, there's not a moment where the name of the prophet is not being uttered. When there's not a moment, because we live in so many different time zones, there's always adhan going on in any of these time zones that they live in. Someone is always doing the ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone is always giving the adhan. And whenever someone gives the adhan, they have to say, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Therefore, the name of Rasulullah is always being addressed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us the tawfiq and ability to follow the commands and the teachings of our Prophet Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these difficult times that we're all going through this pandemic, that Allah gives us hope, and so that we don't lose any hope in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.